Hey guys, I'm Georgia and welcome back to my channel for another 10 books I've read recently video. This is my second one of these videos of this year, which means I've read 20 books this year, which is impressive. Actually, I've read more than 20 books. I think I've read 23 books, and I'm going to tell you all about them today. I have never had such a productive reading year since I was like 12. I don't know what it is, something about the whole world like crashing and burning. Not my personal life, but like the wider world, you know? I just retreat into myself and I just read, and I have been reading so much. Also, I think BookTok really helps. Like every time I open TikTok, it's just people talking about books, and then I'm immediately like, I have to go read. So I put down TikTok and I read instead. And actually, if you find yourself spending too much time on TikTok, that could be a good hack for you. Sorry, my phone's just going off. Let me just put that on Do Not Disturb because that'll get very annoying. Anyway, 10 books I've read recently. First up though, you've probably noticed, I've got a new camera and a new lens, like brand new, both of them, treated myself. I've literally had the same camera the entire time I've been on YouTube. It's the Canon something, the old one I had. I bought it second hand on eBay 10 years ago, 9.5 years ago, and I've used that my entire YouTube career. I've like upgraded the lens a couple of times, but I've never actually upgraded the camera. And I figured, you know what, just buy yourself a new bloody camera, this is your job. So I did it, and I've spent about 3 hours this morning trying to learn how to use this camera, and I've kind of figured it out maybe, but I'm like not camera minded at all. Like some people just really understand cameras, don't they? I'm not one of those people. I literally bought this camera and this lens on the recommendation of a couple of YouTube videos and a YouTube friend that I asked, and this is what we've got. So if things aren't looking right, then please just bear with me. I figured it's best to try it out on one of these like book videos, because these book videos are like a safe space, you know, like if you like books, you're generally a good person. So this is a safe space to try out my new camera. If it's crap, let me know. But let me know nicely. Like I kind of figured I could just like set up and stick the new lens on and turn on my lights and it'd be like the same. But it's not the same. Like the camera's really close to my head right now, but you can see so much more than you could with my old camera, which was really far away from me, but more zoomed in, which I think is the lens. Again, I don't understand it. I know, Georgia, it's your job. It's your job to understand cameras and stuff. Well, I'm sorry. But I don't. I like writing, and then I like sharing with you what I write. And I like reading and sharing with you what I read. And other than that, I'm just making it all up as I go along. Also, I have COVID, which you might be able to hear in my voice. Like, I've currently aggressively got COVID. Like, my tests, they are strong. Let me show you one of my tests. The first test I did last Saturday, I've never seen such an aggressively positive COVID test. I think this camera is, like, autofocus. Oh, it is. Look at that! Look how aggressively positive that COVID test was. It is going down slightly, like this was my one from this morning. But like, I'm on day 5 and I'm still very, very positive. Hello? There we go. That autofocus though, look at that. It's currently Wednesday. I'm going to see Harry Styles on Saturday, and if I'm not tested negative by the time I go to see Harry Styles, I'm going to be so upset because I've been waiting for this show for literally 3 years now, so cross all your fingers for me. Anyway, let's talk about books. That's what we're all here for, isn't it? First up, we have Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, and my main takeaway from this book is, am I stupid? Like, am I an idiot? Because I just don't think I'm smart enough to really take away from this book what the author wanted me to take away from it, because I did not like this at all. This is literally written by the winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature. Like, Kazuo Ishiguro won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and I did not understand this book at all. I hated this book. I gave it 2 stars, but even then I think I'm just being generous, because I felt like if I gave it 1 star, it was just because I was too stupid to understand it. Am I like really putting myself out there right now? Like, it literally says it's one of the most acclaimed novels of recent years. It's shortlisted for the Booker Prize. It's got like a little review on the back by Margaret Atwood. I just didn't understand it. Actually, no, I'm doing myself a disservice because it's not like I didn't understand the book. Like, I understood the plot of it. I understood what was going on in the book. I just feel like there's some like deeper layers to it that I just didn't get. And I don't get why people love it so much because I just don't understand the deeper levels of this book. Like, I feel like it's the kind of book that like English literature teachers would absolutely like froth at the mouth about. Like, English lit teachers must love this, and I feel like that's the same reason why I hated it. So this book is narrated by Cathy, who's in her early 30s, and she's sort of recounting directly to you as the reader. It's a very conversational style about her childhood, her life in general, but particularly her childhood and her years at a boarding school called Hailsham. And you as the reader, like, you know that there's something not quite right at Hailsham. Like, it's not a regular boarding school experience, but you don't quite know what it is. And that's one of my main problems with the book, because maybe I was supposed to be like reading between the lines and figuring out what was going on, but I'm a very literal person. Like, if it's not written down there for me, I don't get it. So I didn't actually understand what was going on until like way too far into the book. And maybe that's on purpose, maybe you're not supposed to know, but the author never like actually explicitly says what Hailsham is. And I'm not going to say here because that's a big spoiler for the book. But I literally spent the first half of the book like, what the fuck is going on in this book? I just don't understand it, and therefore because I didn't understand it, I didn't have sympathy with any of the characters. And also because they're kids, like in the first part of the book, the like narrator and her friends are kids. They don't know what's going on, you didn't know what's going on. It's kind of like a mystery, but not in a fun way. It is written in a very conversational style, so like Cathy is literally talking directly to you as the reader, and it's like a lot of like, oh, to tell you this story I have to tell you this story, to tell you this I need to go back to this, and it like, there's like stories within stories within stories, and it gets very, very like complicated to try and like keep track. And then all of a sudden like a new chapter starts and she's like, anyway, the point of that story was this, and I'm like, I've already forgotten what you were telling me before you like went off on a tangent about this next story. And it just like, to try and like keep it all together in my head, I had to like keep going back to like the chapter beforehand and like seeing like, oh yeah, this is what she was talking about before, so this is what she's carrying on with now. And it's like, it's very convoluted the way it all sort of like fits together. It's really hard to like keep track of it all in your mind. And also it's very, very hard to enjoy this kind of like conversational style with the narrator when you don't like the narrator and you don't like any of the other characters. All the characters in this book are awful. So there's obviously Cathy, and then there's her two friends, Ruth and Tom. And Ruth is just genuinely a terrible, terrible person. Like, Ishiguro tries to make you have sympathy for Ruth, but it never quite works because Ruth is just terrible. Tom's just a bit of a wet blanket. Cathy, you just like want to shake her and be like, what the fuck are you doing? Again, are there layers to this I just didn't get? I don't understand. I feel like there could have been so much more with this book. Like, it's a science fiction sort of dystopian kind of novel, which isn't quite obvious from this or from the blurb, but it definitely is like light sci-fi, I'd say, like light dystopian. What was my point? I was going to say something then, I've forgotten. COVID has given me such bad brain fuzz. Like, my brain just doesn't exist anymore. It's gone, left the building. It's in my notes. Oh yeah, this is what I was saying. There are so many like ethical and moral things that could have been brought up in relation to like the storyline here. Again, I'm not going to say what it is because I don't want to spoil it. But like, there's a lot of like ethical questions that could have been pondered, it could have been like delved into, and they're just not touched at all. And I feel like this book could have been a lot deeper, or at least a lot deeper for like me to understand, if they actually raised these like very, very obvious ethical questions, or like even like went into like the government. So like the book is like something the government obviously put into place. Why is this thing happening in the world? Like, what has happened in the world to lead to this particular storyline having to happen, if that makes sense? It's really hard to do this without spoiling it, but I just felt like it could have gone so much deeper, and like the premise of it is really, really interesting, but the characters sucked, and I feel like it was much more character based than it was like plot based. But if it was plot based, it could have been a really interesting story. Does that make sense? Also, loads of people said this book made them like sob. Apparently it's like really emotional, but I didn't find it like emotionally provoking at all. Like, I got to the end of this book and I was like, thank fuck that is over. Why did people cry? I don't understand. If you like this book, then please tell me why you like this book. I just finished it feeling really stupid and like really dumb, and like, I'm not a dumb person, like, not to blow my own trumpet, but like, I don't think I'm a dumb person, but this book made me feel dumb. But let's move on to something more positive, shall we? And let's talk about this. This is Haven't They Grown by Sophie Hannah. And this is a solid 3 stars. Like, I gave it 3 stars, but like, a 3 stars isn't bad in my book. Like, it's a solid, reliable, like, I would recommend this to people if they're looking for something of this genre. I wouldn't say not read it, it's just not the best book I've ever read, if that makes sense. The storyline in this one is absolutely insane. So this is a story of a woman called Beth, and Beth has this like old best friend. What's her old best friend called? Flora. Her old best friend's called Flora, and they fell out years ago. And they didn't even like fall out. They just kind of like drifted, stopped talking. And Beth kind of like is a little bit obsessed with Flora, kinda, or at least she like thinks about her fairly often. So one day she's like, right, I know where Flora lives now. I'm just gonna go like look at her house, just to like see her house, you know. So Beth goes to the house and she sees Flora getting out of the car, but she also sees 2 children getting out of the car as well. And she knew that Flora had 2 children who were like around 5 years old when they stopped talking 12 years ago. Only the 2 children now are the same children, the same age. They haven't aged in 12 years. Dun dun dun. Like, what? What? Like, the premise of that is so interesting. You do have to suspend your belief a little bit for this, I think. Like, there are parts of it where I was, like, rolling my eyes a little bit. Like, that is really stupid. That would never happen in real life. But this is fiction, so that's kind of the premise. Stuff in books doesn't really happen in real life. At one point, I thought it was, like, leaning towards, like, a supernatural conclusion. And I was like, please, God, no, I can't do supernatural stuff. Weirds me out. No supernatural. Very happy to report it doesn't go down that sort of avenue, but I was really worried it was going to. Beth, the main character, gets like so obsessed with finding out what happened to Flora and what happened to these kids that it's literally like, calm down, woman. Like, you're reading it and you're like, why? Like, what's your motivation behind being so obsessed with this other than just like intrigue? But it's a book. If she wasn't obsessed, then there wouldn't be a book to be written, so it is what it is. The thing with this author, Sophie Hannah, is you're always in good hands. Like, I've never read a Sophie Hannah book that I hated. Like, all of her books are just solid, dependable. If you want something in this genre, sort of like mystery, thriller kind of genre, Sophie Hannah is always a good bet. Is this the best one that she's written? No, I actually think... Am I talking about it in this video? Yes, I've got another one of her books later in this video, which I think I gave 5 stars because I loved it so much. But this is good. Like, it's an intriguing plot, right? It is good. One thing I will say is Sophie Hannah writes teenagers really, really well. I often find myself cringing when adults try to write teenagers because they just go overboard with, like, the slang and, like, the teenage life, like, the apps they use and stuff like that. It really makes me cringe. And, like, I know I'm not a teenager anymore. I'm 28 years old. I'm well out of my teenage years. But Sophie Hannah does a really good job as a proper, fully fledged adult writing a teenager. And the teenage girl in this, I think she was called Xana. Yeah, Xana. Is like one of my favourite characters in this, which I loved. I found it really, really fun. Okay, that was only a brief interlude for like some positivity, because this next book, dear Lord, this is one of the worst books I've ever read. Like, I hated this so much, and I was gutted because I was so excited for it. This is The Incendiaries by R.O. Kwon. This might actually be my least favourite book I've ever read, and I know there's this thing on like Book Talk and BookTube where you shouldn't talk negatively about books. Like, that's a thing, and I've never really understood it, because if I don't enjoy a book, I'm going to tell you about it and tell you why, but that doesn't mean that you won't enjoy it. Like, I didn't like this, did I? Never Let You Go. Lots of people clearly do love this book, so you're allowed to have your own opinions. I think this book was terrible. And the only reason I finished it is because it's only 200 pages long, so I was able to finish it. If it was any longer than 200 pages, I would have just DNF'd it because it wasn't worth my time. And the worst thing about this is this had so much potential. Like, the plot here had so much potential. It could have been so good, and it didn't have anything. It didn't have a plot. It didn't really have characters. It just didn't have anything about it at all. So the premise of this is really interesting. It was supposed to be about a girl who joins a cult and her boyfriend's like on the outskirts watching it happen but can't really like do anything about it. It's supposed to have connections back to North Korea, which I thought was going to be really interesting, and it didn't really deliver on any of those points. Like, yes, it does have a girl who joins a cult, and yes, it does have a boyfriend who's sort of like watching it happen. Yes, it has very loose connections to North Korea. I feel like it's advertised as having more of that, but it doesn't really. But that's about it. That's it. That's the whole book. Like, literally the last sentence of the blurb says, "The Incendiaries is a fractured love story and a brilliant look at the mind of extremists." It's not a brilliant look at the mind of extremists. I wish it was. That would have been really interesting. That's why I picked it up. It barely, like, scratches the surface. It, like, dips a tiny little toe in, and then it's like, that's enough, that's it, that's all we need. So each chapter in this book is written from a different point of view. So you've got Phoebe's point of view, her boyfriend Will's point of view, and the point of view of a man called John Leal, who, at the beginning of the book, you're like, who the fuck is this John Leal? Like, what connection does he have to the rest of it? Turns out he is the extremist in question. And yes, he does turn out to be an extremist, but I just wish we had more of an examination of his mind, because although you're literally seeing his mind through his chapters, they don't make any sense because you don't know who he is, and like, you don't know what part he's going to have in the story. His like thoughts are very like, you just sort of push them aside because you're like, I just don't really know what this means, and it has nothing to do with anything until the end, and then it's too late because you're like, oh, that's what that was. Well, I'm not going to go back and reread it now. Like, I just don't really understand anyone's motives in this book. Like, I don't really understand why Phoebe joined the cult. Like, there's kind of a reason given, but I just don't feel like it goes deep enough into why that reason led to her joining a cult, why it led to her doing what she does at the end of this book. Like, it's not serious enough, if that makes sense. And also, oh yeah, there was some sexual assault in this book, like rape, that was handled really weirdly, like really, really strangely. Didn't like it at all. I'm not particularly sensitive to stuff like that. Like, I generally take things with a pinch of salt, but I felt like it was handled so odd, really strangely. Good news though, I think that's all of my negativity out of the way for this video, because the rest of the books were either fantastic or just like fine, okay. The next one is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. I love Gillian Flynn. I've decided, like, Gone Girl is one of my favourite books of all time. Gone Girl is one of those books I never think of when somebody asks me, like, what's your favourite book? I never think Gone Girl, but, like, it's up there. Like, I love that book so much. And after reading Sharp Objects, I'm officially a Gillian Flynn stan. I'm going to read everything by her. I'm obsessed with her. I want my brain to work like her brain. I want to be able to write the way that she writes. It is so impressive. This book is dark as hell. Like, this book is so dark. And of course, it was a solid 5 stars. So this is the story of Camille, who is a journalist, and she's basically given an assignment by her boss to go back to her very small, sort of like dark, dingy hometown called Wind Gap, where there's been teenage girls getting murdered, or like a teenage girl was murdered, then another teenage girl has gone missing, and Camille's sent by her boss to like go and delve in and like really find out what's going on, because of course her boss thinks that people in Wind Gap are more likely to sort of trust her and talk to her as she's from there than anyone else. And she like protests because she didn't have a good home life, she doesn't get on with her mother or like her general family there at all, but she goes because of course she does, because that's the book. So Camille's relationship with her mother is strange. Like, it's a really fractured relationship. Like, her mother clearly has some like serious mental health issues going on, but Camille also has a younger sister called Amma who lives still in Wind Gap with her mum, and Amma is also weird. Like, Amma is able to sort of like play her mother's mind really well, and it's just such a fascinating relationship to read about. The way that Gillian Flynn writes it, I literally felt like I was there in the room, in some of the conversations they were having, it was baffling. It was so dark and so creepy, and you know there's something weird going on. Like, that's the whole premise. But it's just so much creepier when you feel like you're there. Like, literally there. It was so weird. I can't remember where Wind Gap is. It's either, like, Missouri or Arkansas, like, some state around there. But, like, the way that Gillian Flynn writes, like, the heat. You could, like, feel the heat rising off the page. You, like, felt suffocated by it. I'm just... her writing. Like, I kind of want to reread Gone Girl because I haven't read it in years. And I feel like, at the time, I didn't appreciate the writing style in Gone Girl as much as I would do now, because this, I was gagged. It was so good. So you've got a flawed narrator, you've got a very mentally ill mother, you've got a town that's clearly hiding some very dark secrets, you've got murders going on. It is dark, it is tense, it is so good. And also Amma might actually be one of my favourite characters ever written. Like, just the way that she was written. Amma is so beyond creepy. I will never get over it. I have a feeling they actually made a TV show of this. I don't know why I think that, but I feel like they did, so I think I might go and watch it, or at least I'm going to go Google it after this, and if they did, I'm going to watch it, because just talking about this has reminded me how much I freaking adored this book. I literally read this, and the next day I went to a charity shop, and I picked up Dark Places by Gillian Flynn as well, which is staring at me from my bookshelf right there, so that's probably going to be one of my next reads. The Perfect Girlfriend by Karen Hamilton. I never would have picked up this book because I hate this cover. Like, this cover is just like... is it going to focus? Oh, it does focus. This autofocus is special. I hate this cover. I don't know why. It's not really relevant to my enjoyment of the story. I just hate that cover. I never would have picked this up, but I was actually at 66 Books, which is like a books warehouse in Hemel Hempstead, so not far from where I live. And they do books for like 70% off on like every Sunday. It's crazy. Or like one Sunday a month. I can't remember. Anyway, I was there and I picked this one up because it was like laying face down, because I wouldn't have picked it up otherwise because I hate this. And I read this blurb and it was fascinating. So Juliet loves Nate. She'll follow him anywhere. She's even become a flight attendant for his airline so she can keep a closer eye on him. They are meant to be. The fact that Nate broke up with her 6 months ago means nothing, because Juliet has a plan to win him back. She is the perfect girlfriend, and she'll make sure no one stops her from getting exactly what she wants. True love hurts, but Juliet knows it's worth all the pain. Does that not sound so good? The book was as good as that blurb sounds. Again, not the best book you're ever going to read. I think I gave it like a 3.5 stars. Yes, just reading my notes. 3.5 stars. It's so good. So this book is narrated by Juliet, who's clearly mentally ill. Like, she is a stalker, essentially. That's exactly what she is. She's a stalker, her boyfriend broke up with her, and she is determined to get him back no matter what the cost. I love a book where the villain is the narrator. I love getting inside the mind of the villain of the story. And like, whilst Juliet's not like yours Disney villain, she is the villain of this story. And it's so interesting because I always find that like, they manage to persuade you as the reader that they're in the right. And there were so many points whilst I was reading this book where I was like, yeah, you know what, Juliet's logic, it makes sense. Like, Nate did do this thing, and therefore she does deserve to be with him forever. And it's such like a fucked up way to think whilst you're reading a book, because you know she's in the wrong. But that's a sign of good writing. Like, the fact that I was like agreeing with her, I was like, yeah, you go girl, you go Juliet. I also loved how the plot was like super transparent from the get-go. Like, the blurb, that is pretty much what you get. And I wasn't really expecting there to be any like plot twists or like big reveals in this book. But there were, and like the end of the book, like the last couple of chapters blew my mind, because you're still learning things about like Juliet's motivations and why she's doing what she's doing. It was so cleverly written. I just really enjoyed it. I read it so quickly, but I kind of wish I'd like savoured it a little bit more. This would be a great read if you want like a mystery book where you don't want anything too scary. This is very, very suspenseful, but it's not scary per se. So I highly recommend this if you want something that will keep you on your toes, but isn't really going to keep you up at night. And then we have Fault Lines by Emily Itami. Again, I really like this book. I gave this one a 4 stars. This is the story of a Japanese housewife called Mizuki, who is basically just in a dead end. Like, She's a housewife, her husband doesn't really pay any attention to her, he works stupid hours, and she's got 2 children who obviously she loves her kids, but she's just feeling trapped, she's feeling stuck. She's like, even at the beginning of the book, she's like contemplating suicide, not because life is horrendous, but just because she feels invisible. She just doesn't feel like she exists to anyone apart from herself, and she's feeling a bit lost and she doesn't know what to do. And then one day she meets a man called, what is his name? Kiyoshi. And her and Kiyoshi start an affair, and Kiyoshi showers her with love and affection and attention, the attention that she just doesn't get from her husband. And it's everything she wants, except it isn't everything she wants, because what she wants is her family at home. She just wants her husband to show her attention. She wants her children to like realise how much she does for them. And it's just a really real book, I think. I think it's very relatable to a lot of people. Like, Mizuki just wants emotional connection. She just wants to be noticed. And I love how through Emily Atami's writing, and by the way, this is her debut novel. Like, this is the first book she's ever written, and it's beautifully written. But you sort of feel everything. You feel everything Mizuki feels through her writing, and that's a really impressive feat, I think. I could feel myself there with her. And I'm living miles away from Mizuki. Obviously, this is set in Japan, but I feel like that feeling is very universal. As I said, this book is based in Japan, and I love that. I'm really trying to actively read books set in other cultures. I feel like it's really easy when you're reading, as with anything in life, to just stick with what you know. It's easy to read things based in the UK or even in the USA, things based in Western culture, because that's our everyday life, that's what we can relate to, that's what we know. But it's more fun when you broaden your horizons, and this was a good way to go into that, I think. Is really, really clever actually, because Mizuki is a teacher for Western people in Japan trying to figure out the culture, because obviously there's a lot of cultural things in Japan that Westerners would never be aware of. Little tiny things, things that I learned throughout this book I never would have thought about. And it's really, really clever how that is Mizuki's job, because through that, Emily Atami is also teaching you, as the reader, the Western reader, about these Japanese cultural things without it seeming like you have to learn this to understand why Mizuki did this. It's really subtle and really cleverly done. I really enjoyed this. The next book I read on my Kindle, and that is Every Mother's Son by Alex Smith. This is the 7th book in the DCI Robert Kett series, and I'm still loving the series. I've always got one of these books on the go. I think there's actually only currently 9 books out in this series, and I'm really trying to eke out the last 2 as long as possible, because I read them in the bath. On my Kindle, I always read a Kett book whilst I'm in the bath, so I'm going to be very sad when they're at an end and I don't have any more books to read in the bath. You're probably all very bored of me talking about the DCI Kett series at this point, so I'm going to keep this one brief. It's a police procedural series set in Norfolk in the UK, and each book is a different crime they're trying to solve, but there's always an overarching storyline over all of the different books. I think the first 5 books are about one particular storyline overarching underneath all of the other crimes, if that makes sense. And then since that, it's kind of continued, but it's also kind of something different. But this book in particular, does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense, I'm not doing it again. This book in particular is about a cult. Sorry, I keep I've got this on my lap and the pages keep coming up and I keep hitting it with my elbow, so if you keep hearing page turnings, that's why. This book is about a cult, which I love any books based about cults. I really find it interesting. It's a Christian cult based in Norfolk, in the woods. This cult is basically said to magically be able to provide people with children. If you're having trouble getting pregnant, join this cult and all of a sudden you can get pregnant, you can have children. And that's basically what the crux of it is. But the people, as always is the case with cults, the people involved in it are involved in it. They are all in this their whole life. And then one day, a baby goes missing. The parents are murdered and a baby is stolen from this cult. And although they don't want to get the police involved, Robert Kett's mum is actually in this cult. So his mum calls Kett and he has to come and solve it. And it's just good. I think it's actually the shortest one in the series so far, because I read this one so quickly. But it was really interesting, and I kind of guessed quite early on like what had happened. I don't think I guessed like the extent to which my theory was correct, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like easy to guess what's going to happen. Not my favourite one in the series, but it was good. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the fact it's based around a cult. It's something a little bit different from the rest of them. A lot of the books are like very, very heavy, like very murdery, serial killery, whereas this one, cult, only 2 people died. A bit lighter-hearted, I guess. Although saying that, actually, maybe it's not, because this one's definitely more emotional than the rest of the books. Like, I very rarely cry at books, but I had like a single tear fell at this book, which very rarely happens. And also I'd say that Every Mother's Son is much more based in reality than the rest of the series. Like, it wouldn't shock me if what happened in this book actually happened in real life. Actually, it probably does happen in real life, sadly, quite regularly. So, yeah, that's quite nice, because a lot of them are very far-fetched. I teased earlier there was going to be another Sophie Hannah book, and here it is. This is Did You See Melody by Sophie Hannah. I love this so much. I read this whilst I was on holiday in Croatia, and I had such a good time with this book. I thoroughly enjoyed this. This is the story of a woman called Clara Burrows, who basically is, again, very similar to Fault Lines, is fed up with her life at home. Her husband and her kids just aren't showing her the attention she wants. Something's happened. I don't want to spoil it and say what happened, but something's happened, and Cara's just like, crap. She's like, I need to get away. I need to like run away. So Cara books herself this like £15,000 holiday to this all-inclusive spa in Arizona, and she just gets on the plane and she goes and just leaves her family at home. And when she gets there, she is accidentally sent to the wrong room by the receptionist and walks in on what she thinks is a father and daughter in this room. Only Cara would eventually come to realise the little girl that she saw in the room that night is a missing girl called Melody Chapar. And Melody is like a missing girl in America on the same scale as like Madeleine McCann. Like, this case was huge. And Melody's parents actually ended up going to prison for her murder. Only she's not dead because Cara is convinced that she saw her. And hence the title, Did You See Melody? Did she? We don't know, except I know. Let me tell you, you will not guess where this story is going. This kept me on the edge of my seat. It kept me guessing the entire time. The story is really, really clever. I devoured this so quickly. I also loved that Cara is obviously British, but the rest of the characters in it are American. And Sophie Hannah, I don't know if this was on purpose or not. I really hope it was. But she does such a good job at writing Americans the way that, like, British people see them. Because, like, this book is pretty much from Cara's point of view. And so all the Americans are, like, super over the top and super American. And it's quite funny, but also it's quite true as a British person reading American characters. And I just found that really funny. Sorry, Americans, but sometimes you are over the top compared to us Brits. And Sophie Hannah writes that. So the story here is interspersed with like newspaper articles and blog articles and like transcribed interviews. Like, this is a transcribed interview all here, and it really like speeds up the reading process in parts. I really enjoy that in a book sometimes. Like, you know, when you're just like trying to read a book, it's quite nice when there's like a random page with less on it. I don't know, does that make sense? Do people feel the same way? Sometimes it's just like nice, and like, oh yeah, I'm going to finish this book so quickly because I can just like speed through this written interview. But also like they're all obviously relevant to the storyline. They like push the storyline forward, and it's through these articles that you like learn the story of Melody Chapar, because obviously Cara, being from England, knew nothing about the case, so you're learning about the case alongside her. It's just really, really cleverly written. This is an intricate web that all comes together at the end. I really liked it. Another book I read on holiday, I read this one on the beach. A very light, beachy read this one is. It wasn't at all, it's very dark. This is Love Murder by Saul Black, which is actually the second in the Valerie Hart series. The first of which is The Killing Lessons by Saul Black, which I recommend to people all the time. That book is incredible. It's one of the best like psychological thriller, mystery, crime, thrillery books I've ever read. This book, second in the series, did not disappoint. I was really nervous to read this because I loved the first one so much, and I was like, please, Saul Black, don't disappoint me. He didn't. I really enjoyed this. I almost forgot how damn good The Killing Lessons was until I read this, although I also think I forgot just how dark it is, because as I was reading this, I was like, Jesus Christ, this is fucked up. It is so dark, like possibly even for me, like edging on maybe too dark at points, but I fought through and I'm glad I did because I loved the like unravelling of the mystery in this one. It was really good. So this is the story of a female serial killer called Catherine Glass who was captured and sent to prison for her horrific crimes. Only Catherine Glass worked with a male accomplice, and the male accomplice has never been found, and it's been years and years and years. They've never heard anything from him, and then all of a sudden Valerie Hart, the main detective, starts receiving sort of correspondence from this mystery male accomplice saying that he wants Catherine to be freed, and if she's not freed, he's going to keep killing people. And then Valerie Hart's got to hunt down this guy and find out who he is, only his sort of messages are very cryptic, and he says the only person who's going to understand these messages and who's going to be able to tell you who the next victim is, where the next victim is Catherine Glass herself. So Valerie's got to go to prison and sort of work with Catherine Glass to stop this male accomplice serial killer. This is dark, violent, fast-paced. I did guess who the killer was very early on in the book, but that didn't sort of detract from my enjoyment of it as a whole, I don't think. But one thing I will say, actually, if we're talking about negatives, is this very much has female characters written by a male author kind of vibes. And that's because it is female characters written by a male, but Catherine Glass in particular, it gave me very much like a male's fantasy of what a serial killer is, rather than like a actual female serial killer. And like maybe that's just the character, that's what the character's intended to be. She's like this femme fatale, sexy serial killer type thing. But like, I don't know, I feel like it would have been better if it was written by a woman, if that makes sense. But maybe that's a weird criticism to have of it. Also gave me very much sapphic vibes between like Catherine Glass and Valerie Hart. Very sapphic, like lesbian undertones that obviously never come to anything, but is frustrating. But maybe that's supposed to be the case. I don't really know. The last of the 10 books today is Lonely Hearts by Lisa Gray, and this is the 4th book in the Jessica Shaw PI series. Again, I love this series. I think I've got them all for free on Kindle Unlimited, same as the DCI Robert Kett series. So if you've got Kindle Unlimited, then I would highly, highly recommend you check out this series, because it's like a police procedural, but it's PI instead. So if you're not like a fan of police stuff, which I understand a lot of people aren't, this could be a really good way to like scratch that itch without like it being too policey, if that makes sense. So the storyline here is a woman called Christine comes to Jessica saying that she lost track of her childhood friend Veronica many years ago and is wanting to track her down. Only Veronica's got a bit of a shady past, not even shady. Veronica fell in love with a serial killer and married him in prison. So basically 15 years beforehand, Veronica and Christine signed up to something called the Lonely Hearts Club, which is a service that connected women on the outside with men in prison looking for love. And Veronica meets and falls in love with serial killer Travis Dean Ford. And their relationship, as you can guess, isn't a great one because he's a serial killer. Like, no denying it, he is a serial killer. And it's really interesting because it's look at hybristophilia, which is when women fall in love with serial killers, like whether they want to change them or they just like the danger. Hybristophilia is a really interesting phenomenon and something I find really interesting to look into. So to find a book about that, I was sold immediately. Again, this is just a really solid read. This whole series is just like a solid series. It's not going to blow your mind. It's not Nobel Prize winning literature, even though apparently that's not always great. It's just good, easy to read books. I think a lot of the time people get very pretentious about books. They're like, if you're not reading the classics, if you're not reading Nobel Prize winning literature, then what's the point? But reading's for fun, isn't it? Like, you're supposed to just read what you like and have fun, and who cares if all my books I read are either sapphic fiction or murder mysteries. That's what I enjoy. I enjoy those kind of books. And I have been pushing them out recently, but you know what? I'm always going to come back to those two genres. And there's no need to be pretentious about it, is there? Just read what you love. Reading's supposed to be fun. If you start a book and you don't like it, you don't have to finish it. Words I say to myself on a daily basis. I always finish it though because I'm stubborn, but I'm trying to stop it. But anyway, this series, just easy to read. There's super, super short chapters in this book, which just makes it such a breeze to get through. I really enjoy them. I like them. I actually love the character of Jessica. Like, speaking about Saul Black and like men writing women, Jessica Shaw is a woman written by a woman. Like, she is badass, but she's soft in all the right places. She is probably one of my favourite like female characters ever. I just really like her as a character. She's very fleshed out, especially over like the course of 4 books. Like, you learn more and more about her background, and yeah, I like it. I'm very excited to read the next one in the series, which is, as of yet, unreleased, but I know it's coming, so you better bet I'm going to be buying that as soon as it's released. And there you go, there are 10 books I have read recently. Let me know if you've read any of these, do you agree or disagree with any of my reviews. I'm sorry about my voice, I know I'm very bunged up. I've been like, just talking. I have no memory of anything I've said in the last like half an hour because bunged nose, fuzzy head, COVID, I'm gonna go have a nap now. I really didn't think it would hit me this bad, and to be fair, it didn't. Like, I was ill on Sunday. Sunday was bad. And then I've been kind of okay. The last like 24 hours, I just don't feel like I exist on this planet currently. So this video is going to be a joy to edit, I'm sure. Anyway, I'm rambling. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your opinions. Follow me on Goodreads and on Storygraph. I'll leave them linked down below. If I've forgotten to link them down below, then shout at me in the comments because I always forget. Thanks for watching. Bye guys.